Where is Amandeep?
Aman,
He's
say
there.
something.
I can't see Aman.
Actually, you're on the phone, huh? So you need to sweat.
Okay, okay, okay.
Slide कीजिए अपनी screen को.
I get it. I get it. Yeah, yeah.
There are people waiting to join, I'm told.
No. Preeti ji, I've already admitted everybody.
Okay.
Yeah. So there is no one in the waiting lounge.
Ruma's waiting. Ruma?
Aman, say something so that everybody can hear you.
Can everybody hear me right now? Is my voice clear enough?
No, not at all.
Take that off.
Is this
Just
better?
take out that pin from your laptop. Now say something. Hello.
Is this better now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, of course we can hear you, but then the voice is so bleak. You need to be a little loud.
Everything.
Nirupama ji.
Done speaking.
Please turn on your camera.
I'll do that.
Is this better? Can you hear me now?
No, it's not.
Not at all, no.
I have started the video.
Yeah,
Yours is fine, Niru.
It is fine.
Amandeep, we cannot hear you at all.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah.
Okay, I really have to shout into my computer then. Strange. It normally works.
Right.
I think Gayatri just had to say that and then there you go.
Yeah, you could hear me earlier, that cat talk and all that, no?
Exactly, yes.
पता नहीं क्या हो गया.
Okay.
Okay, Preeti ji, we can start. And please make a request to everybody to mute yourself because I can see a couple of people still who cannot be muted by the Zoom even.
We're beginning now, so I request the audience to please mute their audios so that we can listen to the speakers, and then you'll get your chance later when we begin with the question and answer. After brilliant opening session yesterday, where we had two poets and authors in conversation with publisher and founder of Speaking Tiger, Ravi Singh, today we continue our conversation around issues of mental health and well-being and what constitutes these terms. I mean, we often find ourselves using them fairly loosely, so let's try and deconstruct and see what these mean. Jerry Pinto and Jilmil Beckenridge, who were speaking yesterday, were passionate, they were very moving, they were very personal, telling us that it's all right to be vulnerable, that it's all right to hurt, and to not always be feeling on top of the world. And they also questioned this excessive obsession that we have for being young and fair and beautiful and free from all illness and disease. This obsession that we have with pollution and with purity, and how this often translates into what Jilmil referred to as toxic positivity, where we fail to see that life brings with it risk. There is sunshine and there is rain, and both coexist in each one of us to a greater or lesser degree. To deny one is to be an ostrich. Talking is important, communication is important, and silence around issues of mental health is a damning indictment of our society. This silence needs to be broken. Jilmil even spoke about something called mad pride, much like the gay pride parades, where you acknowledge and bring into our books, bring into our world, and bring into our writing, our films, our plays, and definitely into our conversations, debates about these very crucial issues. Today, we have three writers who will focus, of course, on their own writing, which will reveal what they themselves think about. But also, we will talk about this intensely abnormal and strange time that we are inhabiting. There's a virus that has felled the world, a pandemic of epic proportions that has taken lives and livelihoods, taken our futures and our loved ones, that has forced us to relook at the life that we had created, that we had built around us, and that now stands cracked, shattered. Each one, of, each one of us has been impacted economically, physically, emotionally, as we hide indoors, as we wash our hands and we sanitize, as we stay away from our friends and our colleagues in a bid to save ourselves. Nirupama Dutt is a poet, translator, journalist with several books to her credit, including the Ballad of Bant Singh. She lives in Chandigarh. Nirupama is on the Maja House Board of Advisors, as is Ravi Singh, and she brings to Maja House and to me personally her storehouse of information about Punjab, her unstinting help, and her constant encouragement. Amandeep Sandhu is a Bangalore-based technical writer for the IT industry, but I know him as a person, as the person who introduced me to Punjab and to its landscape and its fault lines through his amazing journey, honestly told in his book, his huge magnum opus on Punjab. His recent short ebook on India's mental health in the times of coronavirus is available on Amazon. Gayatri Gill is an author and screenwriter. She's the co-founder of Swastik Productions, and she has more than 15 years of writing experience across television, digital, and animation formats. Her debut collection of stories of the lockdown is called The Day Before Today, and it's just been published. She loves contradictions, hates being boxed in, loves creating and inhabiting her characters who seem to live on the brink of insanity. Talking to them and taking them on this evening is Ravi Singh, publisher, founder of Speaking Tiger. He's a fine sensibility and he picks only the best fiction and non-fiction to publish. I thought I'd also mention a couple of really strange facts that I read in the New York Times today. So the first one is a report from the Brookings Institution estimated that the pandemic and resulting economic crisis could lead to 300,000 to 500,000 fewer births in the US. A survey from Louisiana State University found the lockdown may have altered our personal habits for the worse. We snack more, we exercise less, go to bed later, and we sleep poorly. So on that note, Ravi, will you take them on?
Well, that is one thing that that statistic kind of proves is that, being locked in with people you love or profess to doesn't always mean that you connect or there's intimacy. Yesterday, when Preeti and me and the others were talking about having a Maja House session on mental health, and then while we were talking, we decided that it's an important issue. Most people prefer not to talk about it, but now that isolation, involuntary isolation, at least if nothing else, has been inflicted on everybody, people are beginning at least to listen. So we thought that we would have two sessions and include a number of voiceless experiences. So this is the second session, and what I thought we would do today is move a little towards a more general space, in the sense that yesterday we were speaking largely about people who are afflicted with mental health issues, illnesses, or those who have been caregivers. And Jerry and Chilwell spoke about that. Today we will also speak about some of that, but look at how it is not something that affects a very small percentage. It is something that does or can potentially affect most of us. It does. It's just that the definitions that we have for these things tend to be very narrow. We sensationalize them, and therefore, perhaps that's a kind of defense mechanism. We don't want to talk about the fact that most of us, are also vulnerable. And there was in Chilwell's introduction to her book yesterday, there was a line which I read out which said, "Let's all be vulnerable together," which I thought is what I think these sessions are going to do. Nirupama, what we thought was that we would start with hopefully readings. Nirupama, are you going to read also or not? Have you decided?
No, I'll read. I'll read a few lines from a poem.
Good. Okay. So we thought that we would, start with readings and then after that have conversations. So Nirupama, if you could start with the reading, and then after that Gayatri, and then Aman, and then we will start the conversation, questions and answers.
I'm reading from a poem, In Sad Times, Dukhi Dino Mein. It's not my own. It's a very famous poet of Punjab who wrote in Hindi, Kumar Vikal. But, I believe that any poem that strikes you so much is your own. So I read Kumar Vikal's poem, which has been coming a lot to my mind in these days. He says, in sad times, one does not write poems. One does a lot else though, from cracking jokes to swallowing poison, but one does not write poetry. In sad times, even in daylight, one looks for darkness to weep in. In sad times, one broods a lot, for instance, on the depth of the water in the city's lake, or the height of the tallest building in town, and screams out loud in silence to the dear ones to form an embankment around the lake and stop the lift going up to the top floor of the tallest building. But dear ones are trees. They give shade and cool breeze, but they cannot be your embankment. In sad times, one becomes one's own frail or strong embankment, but one does not write poems. This is a poem from Kumar Vikal.
Ravi? You're mute, Ravi.
Yeah, no, it said the host is not allowing you. Okay.
I would request Raviji, please don't mute yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Nirupama. आपने अपनी पोइट्री में से नहीं पढ़ा, तो मैं ऐसा करता हूँ कि मैं 2 स्टैंडर्स पढ़ देता हूँ इस किताब से, The Black Woman. And why I wanted to read this, I wanted to do that later, but I'll do it now, is because it's very relevant, beautifully relevant, I think, to the state that all of us are in today. The poem is Laughing Sorrow. It says, I will not let sorrow sit still today in my home. Pushing it into my jhola, I will take it along to the city streets. Today I will steal a bright red gulmohar bloom and put it in my hair. Borrowing smiles from the coffee house waiter, a little joke with the library caretaker, I will share. When all these tricks to cheer a sorrowing day fail, I will sit on the slope outside the girls' hostel and light my cigarette. And it goes on. It's just beautiful. And these are the things that we are denying ourselves more than the pandemic denying it. Anyway, we'll come back to that later. And specifically in the context of the pandemic, Gayatri, if you could read from one of your stories.
Yeah, and before I begin, I want to say what Nirupama ji just said about the embankment being yourself. I think that is something that most of us, I think that's really, really relevant. And yeah, so ironically, the story that I've got is called Mummy Ji and Pummy. And it's also about finding your own embankment within yourself. And of course, humor being a great tool of defense, at a time like this when you don't really have much else to go on. So, yeah, this story is called Mummy Ji and Pummy, and I'll read a little bit from it. He and the Chipkali crawled out of the room together. Mummy Ji got her son back, and Pummy secured her chance at being Mummy Ji someday. That's why the elders always proclaimed that Mummy Jis were far superior to mummies. It was true. Whereas Pummy's biological mummy would have just sat and sniveled, too scared to take a stand, her Mummy Ji seized the moment and became her biggest partner in crime. What's more, they got rid of the biggest pest in the Bhandari household without spending a rupee. Their respective husbands would have been proud of them had they been there to see. As they sit there now in their garden with the gloriously flowering bougainvillea, Mrs. Bhandari and her daughter-in-law Pummy sipping their evening adrak chai, munching on Marie biscuits, they sigh as they watch their cherubic sons play softball on all fours. Yes, things had worked out just fine once they had all let go of their masks. Now their organic veggies business was booming and the flowers were doing all right. To think they had started on this journey only 8 months ago. If I had to put a finger on it, I'd say their luck turned the day he smashed Pummy's head on the bathroom mirror. Not smashed, splattered. She had split that day into 100 pieces, reflecting in fragments of mirror that scattered across the cold, dark floor. Each piece promising its own 7 years of ill luck. It was only an illusion, of course, for in the flesh, Pummy wasn't broken. She lay sprawled across the toilet seat, shattered, bleeding, broken, they lay, both Pummy and his beloved commode. For as she had fallen, she had grabbed the flush tank for support, and it had come off the wall with a crash, taking Pummy down with it. Now the commode's illicit relationship with the sewage pipe lay exposed. A big spurt of water from the pots behind sprayed across his face. The commode at least had reacted violently to the abuse. All Pummy and Mummy Ji had ever done till date was only cry. He made Mummy Ji dial the plumber even before she called the family physician. Both said the same thing. They were not available for home visits, not until the lockdown eased. By the grace of Vaheguru Ji, Mummy Ji was good at first aid and had in her possession a large box filled with medicines of every kind, like the small suitcase that Mary Poppins carried, with remedies for every need under the sun. This battered blue tin box held medical bits and bobs, bottles filled with pink and green syrup, swabs, bandages, band-aids, painkillers to take away the deepest aches and pains, and pills that could keep you dreaming sweet even on the most nightmarish of nights. Mummy Ji had lived a full life. No one knew better than her that it was up to the women of the house to always be prepared. No matter how big or small calamity, finding solutions was what women were born for. So she took care of Pummy, patched her up perfectly well. It was the commode that had suffered more damage. It was beyond repair. And so this is how this story goes. So there's a little passage about the masks that I think people wear, and where this lockdown has led all of us who have lived our lives wearing so many masks. It's much easier, I think, to talk about multiple personality disorders. But what we forget sometimes is that we all suffer from these multiple personalities that we carry every single day. And this lockdown has just taken a lot of those masks off. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's these masks, guys, that you're saying, actually, for something like this, domestic abuse, even without the pandemic, those are not things that are, that are seen. So there's a mask there always, even without the pandemic. It's and Gayatri's stories, all of them are powerful. I think she doesn't hold back. The best of her stories, they really. There's also almost a rage there. So whether the pandemic made it easier for you to, well, we'll come back to that question later. But Aman, you said you would be reading from your essay that you've written, the long essay on the lockdown and the pandemic. If you could read from that, and that would then give us an opening to specifically talk about mental health issues in the context of the lockdown, and then about mental health in general.
Thank you, Ravi. Can you hear me now clearly?
Yes, well, I can. I don't know about you.
Yeah. If you can, then we are sorted.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I mean, everybody can then. So this was an essay called Bravado to Fear to Abandonment, Mental Health and the COVID-19 Lockdown. I'll read about a page and a half because as I was discussing with Preeti ji yesterday, there is something that we need to understand when we talk about mental health and mental illness. Somehow we club the two terms together, which to me seems a little, as Jerry was saying, language is everything. So I'll come to those. And just bear with me. Ever since the coronavirus contagion gripped the world, I have been thinking how my mother, Amarjit Kaur, would have been an ideal candidate for the COVID-19 contagion prevention campaign. Very sorry, this cat. I'll read again. Ever since the coronavirus contagion gripped the world, I have been thinking how my mother, Amarjit Kaur, would have been an ideal candidate for the COVID-19 contagion prevention campaign. All her life, my mother washed her hands twice, 20 to 30 times a day, mostly with soap and water. Her hands were swollen from too much washing. All her life, our larger family and friends mocked, ridiculed, even disparaged her for her little ritual. We knew it was obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, and we used to try and dissuade her. Sometimes we'd reason with her to not wash her hands so often, or drink so much tea and tell her to stop muttering all the time. Yet she continued to wash her hands, consume many cups of tea, and mutter. The reason I started with an example from my own life is to put in perspective that what is considered normal by people is actually contingent on the culture and behavior of society at a certain point in time. Look around. During the COVID-19 contagion, our three biggest preventions against the spread of the coronavirus are washing hands, wearing masks, social and physical distancing. Washing hands too many times, considered a prime symptom of a mental health condition, has now become the de rigueur prescription by doctors, healthcare workers, civic administration, and the government. What does that say about how we define the mental health of an individual or of a society? Not that OCD does not exist or is not a problem. It is. The example above illustrates a simple point. Mental health conditions do not lend themselves easily to labeling or ways of measuring them. Mental illness are not like, say, fever, of which we are certain when our temperature goes up beyond normal, or a broken leg, which clearly hampers our ability to walk, or high blood pressure that can be measured with a sphygmomanometer. Mental illness are also unlike any other affliction where the sufferers raise their voice, rush to hospitals for a cure, or demand that the government take care of them. More often than not, the ones who suffer mental illness retreat, shy away from society, hide themselves, go silent in public discourses. In order to understand them, we need to orient ourselves differently to how we understand other illnesses, primarily through external manifestations of symptoms. Mental illness is primarily subjective in that the most reliable testimony is of the subject and the subject's behavior as observed by caregivers, the psychiatrist or therapist, and the world at large. This is unlike other sciences where there are absolutes on which the world converges. The periodic table in chemistry, Newton's laws in physics, Darwin's theory of evolution in biology, or the number system in mathematics. Though the subject can be put through psychometric tests, much work is still pending in defining the categories of illness through which we assess, diagnose, and label the various conditions, and prescribe treatment or drugs to those who need help. While the criteria of defining mental illness is hazy, it is important to not limit our understanding of mental health only to illness. While there are many definitions, since we are talking about it in the era of COVID contagion, let us go with how the WHO defines mental health. Quote, a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and is able to make a contribution to his or her society. Unquote. Notice that the definition focuses on how functional an individual is in her environment. It emphasizes on the overall well-being of an individual and her capacity to actualize her abilities, deal with the turbulence of life, and contribute to her environment. It is similar to physical health, which is also not defined by illness or conditions, but holistically. Mental health is an indication of the mindscape of an individual or of a society. Mental illness, on the other hand, the same WHO defines it as, quote, a broad range of problems with different symptoms. They are generally characterized by some combination of abnormal thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and relationships with others. Most of these disorders can be successfully treated. The fact is, though we have names of various mental illness, we do not even have a universally agreed upon framework of what is normal, what is abnormal, and what is deviant. Thank you.
Thanks, Aman. I also wanted to read a little bit from your essay, where you say you compare COVID-19 itself with mental illness, and you say, we know little about both. They both sneak up on us, and we can remain asymptomatic for long until they burst upon us. The symptoms of both manifest in varied ways, but both push an individual away from society. Before I go to Nirupama, I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about this. Is now in this where pushing somebody away from society. I mean, that is not a choice somebody with mental illness actually makes. That I will consciously retreat from society. But now in pandemic, lockdown, it has been forced upon people. And so what has become almost impossible is sitting with somebody, listening to them, caring for them, and I think most importantly, touch, all of that. And these, from what I understand, are crucial when you are with somebody who is mentally ill. When you are either as somebody related to them, who loves them, or is a professional caregiver. These are the essential things. Now, when this is not available to them, how much more difficult do you think does the world become for someone with mental illness at this moment?
No. For people who already have defined or undefined conditions, the pandemic has been brutal, very, very brutal. It was brutal not only in terms of the things you mentioned, being able to listen to them, to be able to touch them if they're allowed touch. My mother didn't. But counseling, but even in terms of getting medicines, very regular medicines, which are prescription medicines, which chemists should actually provide, because many of them are also sleeping pills. Most chemists refused medication to the patients, and this affected actually even beyond the pandemic, beyond the mentally ill. I talk about another set of statistics. If you allow me, I'll just read it out. It's quick. It's about a paragraph.
Yeah.
But what did the lockdown do to not only mentally ill? I mean, at some point, psychiatrists and mental health practitioners started telling the government and to issue notices to the chemists that they can give medications for prescriptions which are 3 months to 1 year old, and most patients had those prescriptions. So then they got medication. But for a few weeks, it was catastrophe for them. And you know how it is. I mean, if a person is on maintenance mode and they don't get the medication, they relapse. And many, many relapse like that. I'll read out some not related to mental health, but as somebody was saying yesterday, it's a social issue as well. I'll read out a few very hard statistics that happened. Each day, India loses more than 7,000 people to cardiovascular disease, 2,000 to cancer, 1,200 to tuberculosis. Each year, we report 3.3 lakh malaria cases, more than 1 lakh dengue cases, 2.2 lakh typhoid, 4.2 crore cases of acute respiratory infection, and 7.5 lakh cases of pneumonia. India has the highest under 5 mortality rate in the world. Every day, more than 3,000 families lose their children under the age of 5. Each year, we might add more than 2 lakh new end-stage renal disease patients, which adds to more than 3 crore dialysis every year. The lockdown left all these multitudes of people and their caregivers and families to their own devices. So the catastrophe, I mean, as Dr. Alok Serene said, he's a psychiatrist at Sitaram Bharti, he was very clear. He said there was a pandemic that happened, but the measures that we took, the initial about 80 days of lockdown, we overlaid the pandemic with an economic catastrophe, and we ruptured the whole health industry with that.
Well, I mean that that's a mental illness that affects people who govern societies.
Absolutely.
That really is.
I'm glad you said it. Yeah.
Really, but Nirupama, coming to you, we were talking about the what you would call normal networks in society that are given to you or that you create. Those being, as Aman said, ruptured. I want to go back to the conversation that you had, and which is something I find remarkable.
Yes, Ravi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Hello? Nirupama, can you hear me?
Nirupama ji, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Ravi, no, I missed the last sentence.
But you can hear me now?
Yeah, now I can.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
What Aman, when he was talking about the fact that, the normal networks, let's call them normal networks, that you have with people in society, either because you are born into them, you're given them, or you create your own solidarities and networks of affection, of support, when those are ruptured in a situation like a lockdown. But what I wanted to ask you was, this is not something that happens only in times of a pandemic or when there's a lockdown or when things are forced upon you. But you, for instance, which I found always remarkable, is that you've always been very candid about the times when you've come undone, when you're alone, you're lonely, and then you laugh about it, you move on, life carries on. Even during the pandemic, I remember one conversation that we had, and you broke down talking not so much about your personal situation, but about your colleagues, young colleagues who were being laid off, about many others. So this whole climate of helplessness, of isolation, of loneliness, of support being yanked away. Why did that affect you so much? What you saw around you, would it have affected you as much if you were going about your normal life? There would have been the distractions of work or meeting somebody. Would that
it would have affected otherwise also, but in times such as these, we saw suddenly. I think the pandemic was into the second month or something when newspaper offices started shunting people out. And it was done from paper to paper in different ways. Some very senior people, some very young people who were not getting too much of salary also were suddenly not required and given a 2 days notice. Now, one thing was that, normally in good old days, you'd be given some time if the newspaper didn't want you. And you had time to look around for a job. And if you were good at your work, invariably you'd get a job in another paper quite easily. But this was a time when there were no jobs going around. It was the time what were you to do, And the anxiety was greater to me. In fact, I was expecting to be sacked. I'm post-retirement. working on a stipend, a retainer. And I thought, what would they need a 65-year-old woman for now? Probably I'll be the first one to go, among the first to go. That was plaguing me a lot. And the other thing was that a certain depression was setting in, a certain anxiety and depression. And I would like to share with you here, Ravi, you'd probably know, but 40 years ago at 25, I had attempted suicide of a broken heart, a failed love affair, or I thought it had failed, whatever. And I had landed up in Chandigarh's largest hospital, the Postgraduate Institute of Medical Sciences, taken there, treated, and as Sylvia Plath would say, repaired and retreaded for the road. But, it was what I experienced there. I was very guilty that I had attempted, guilty towards my mother, towards my people who liked me, that I had caused them a lot of trouble. But I was extremely unhappy and I didn't really want to live at that time. That's how I felt. And then, of course, started the treatment. I would have these young interns coming, a young intern in particular, coming to talk to me. Now there I don't know whether it was a little bit of madness or the drugs that they were giving me all the time, that I started poking fun at them. I thought I'm poking fun at them. They'd come and ask me that, why did you try? So I said, it's a literary problem. So many people, don't you know? Sylvia Plath did it. The Duke of Mishima did it. And Virginia Woolf in late age did it. I said, I can't tell you so easily. Then after 2-3 days, when I thought I was a little normal, I did try to tell that it was this. I wouldn't confess the affair at all, but I'd go around it and say that I was unhappy. Anyway, I was moved from there to the emergency, to the private ward, to a room. And the doctor in charge, that's what I'm trying. And those days, if you please, suicide was crime, You could be jailed if you attempted suicide. And I remember a little funny incident from it, that while I was sitting there on the bed in the emergency itself, second or third day, a policeman came and he had something and he said, I want to ask you, what did you do and why did you do? So I again started acting funny. That he says, no, IG Saab. I said, who has sent you? I was the star journalist rising on the scene. Who has sent you? I said. He says, IG Saab has sent me. So I said, no, I don't talk to bureaucrats. That's not my area. And I don't wish to have anyone coming from the IG. Till he let out the next secret. He said, your editor had requested the IG that a statement be taken from you. So then I kept silent. And then he read out a statement that Raat ko mera, at night I had a headache and I was feeling restless. So I wanted to take some medicine. I did not realize what the medicine is. My mother's medicines were lying on the table. So I swallowed them and that's what I did. And that's how I am here. And I signed that, But I felt very cheated that even my attempt to kill myself had been created into a mistake. But I wanted to touch on, because Aman has also spoken about mental health and mental illness, I wanted to touch upon the experience I had with the psychiatrist there. Or the doctor who's in charge of the floor, whichever floor it was in PGI. He came to me and started asking me all kinds of questions. A 25-year-old girl way back in 1980 would make a little lascivious listening also, that, okay, why did she do it? What happened? So he came and asked him. Of course, I just didn't tell him anything. But when suddenly there was one person who came to visit me. I have not been able to trace him after that, Dr. Castus. By then they had started put me on drugs. And one day my mother got very worried because they'd give me a tablet. I think I'd been in the hospital for 10 days and I would be asleep all day like a vegetable. So one day this Dr. Castor was his name, Castor. He came to see me. He was doing some research in the PG. I'd come from the US. And he said, why did you attempt? So again, I said, you come from the US and you ask a good little Hindu girl that why did she attempt suicide? What will you know? He interrupted me and he said, my feeling is that someone whom you trusted has behaved otherwise. And that's why I remained silent. He had sort of hit the nail, right where it should have been. So he told my mother that don't let any doctor other than from the psychiatry department come to talk to her. Just refuse. And anyway, all that happened and I was to be discharged. And they said these medicines you have to take regularly. And on the quiet, he told my mother that to give her half the pill. Don't give her the full pill that has been prescribed. So when time came for me to be released, I kept that card also for a long time. When they release you, they give you a card with your ailment and your treatment mentioned on it. It said acutely schizophrenic, counseling and drug therapy recommended. If that fails, she should go in for electroshock therapy. So anyway, with that card, we were coming out, I on the stretcher, and I was being pushed by my mother. And this Dr. Castus came running from somewhere. And he stopped my mother and my brother. And he said, do not bring her here again. Accept her as she is. And she doesn't need any treatment. And my family was really, and another thing he said that send her back to work as soon as you can. So that's what happened. But, if that treatment had been carried on, probably, Ravi, things would have been very different. If I had been put through all that, drug therapy,
what would you,
shock therapy. And
yeah, what would you put that down to? Was that resilience, your personal resilience, or were there people that you spoke to? Because I can't imagine you giving people the same story that was put on that file. You would probably have told them, yes, I did try to kill myself, etc. You would have been, honest with everybody. But what was it that helped you through that time? And did you attempt suicide again? I'm sorry, I'm just asking these questions because
No, I didn't. I didn't attempt again, though for some time I thought I would, I got immense support from my family, from my friends, and also from my work situation. I was sort of welcomed back into the office and, people who were not befriending me. And I got some support from people I knew well who had never shared with me that they had also attempted it 5 years ago or 6 years ago. Now, there was this very brilliant colleague of mine, Malayali. I think I'll share his name. He became an editor of Deccan Herald later, AVS Namboothri. We were friends and I had a lot of regard for his mind, I would use it for my headlines, for getting words from him. So he came and sat down to me, said a few words, and he said, Niro, I also had done it. So I looked at him shocked. I felt very sorry that I had attempted suicide like a starlet. In those days, Rekha, the film star, over a little broken heart with one actor, Vinod someone, I forget the second name, not Khanna, the other Vinod.
Mehra.
Had taken Tik 20 or something like that. I had taken a cocktail of Tik 20 on bait and some bits of compost. Now, I thought now Namboothri, the brilliant one, his reason has to be very different. So Namboothri, what was your reason? So he says, well, Nehru, it was the same as you. I said, I thought you would be for something intellectual. He says, no one ever attempts suicide for intellectual reasons. It's mostly personal. So I also had a little club of people who had failed at this attempt,
Right.
egging me on. And also, I have been very, very doubtful ever since then about drug therapy, about, of course, electric shock therapy is the extreme, about all these things that, I worked after that. The only thing which I remember, I realized that the officers doubting me a little. I used to bring out an art and culture, literature page. No one ever bothered to even pass it. Otherwise, the news editor or the chief sub has to pass it. After 2 weeks, when I joined office and I brought out the page, the news editor, he was an old man, came there and he said, "Let me just have a look at it." And he scanned it and then tick marked it. So that I got that maybe they're fearing that, I might do something funny, but, but nothing else. Now, coming to from those times to this time during the pandemic, I felt the urge to, that maybe I'll have to end my life. That kind of anxiety started coming. And I live in a 9th floor flat. So I said, I won't make a mess of it again. Because I remember one of my brothers who came to see me from Assam at that time, he came and said, "Neeru, you couldn't even do this one properly. You made a mess of the whole affair." So I said, probably I'll have to do it. But that anxiety was related to fear that I have a daughter and a granddaughter to support. My job will go. There'll be no work. I'll have no money. And I started seeing this vision that I'll be throwing myself off this 9th floor, And then one very frightening thing which I saw, this would come again and again, and I was getting very disturbed. And one day I dreamt that it's not dreamt, but the vision I saw half awake. Not that I'm throwing myself, I'm throwing my little 6-year-old granddaughter from the 9th floor. That was the fear, that what would happen to them. So this was very strong before the sackings had happened. This was before whole lot of people had to leave newspaper offices and other jobs also, but I have experience of the newspaper job. This was a fear that I hadn't lived life very wisely. I hadn't saved like that. What would become, if I had no money, I could no longer support it. And also the way the pandemic was presented, the whole fear that went around with it. Of course, people died. Of course, all kinds of things happened. Just this morning, our famous art historian B.N. Goswami's wife passed away in the PGI because of this. It was, but it was not as hopeless as it was being made out to be, and how afraid one was getting of it. Anyway, what I started putting my mind into work and doing as much more than was required, probably. And then, of course, I was not going to be sacked. I feel very bad for the others, but probably because I was not important enough to be sacked. I was not getting that much kind of money and other things, whatever their reasons.
Right.
But what happened, surprisingly to me in this period, quickly I set up a food catering business for my daughter so that she have something to fall back on. But in some ways, I found more work coming in, a lot more work coming in than before. So certain channels were opening also. And even those who left, those who were bright enough were not without work. They were finding work, things were happening. But in a way, this pandemic could be, the poem you read, that how does one fight the blues? It's by going out, meeting people, Awara Gardi, as we called it, Addabazi, sitting, all that was taken away. But again, I think work came to the rescue.
Right.
And then at a point, while following all protocol, one stopped fearing the situation. That,
It's interesting
was
because, sorry, Deepa, just to tell you, it's interesting because one of the comments, I didn't read the entire comment while you were speaking, was I think from Mr. Bear, who said that the pandemic has been liberating because it's helped him come to terms with or accept or not fear mortality. So it's that kind of one of the consequences is also that
that kind of
front and accepting.
Similar to I think a love affair. When you are deep into it, you feel that, well, if this ends, it's the end of the world for me. I'll not be able to survive it. This won't happen. Similarly, the world as we know it, as the world which makes us secure, sitting at the chela, having a cup of tea, meeting people, going here, going there, all that was curtailed. But then gradually we sort of came to terms that, okay, this too shall pass.
Yeah, if I could go to Gayatri about this, because I think in the conversation with Preeti, and we're talking about, and she was talking about how people have dealt with it, and also how your book, we were talking about your book and the space from which you wrote it, and then she said that you feel that you're past it now. That whatever that moment of dread, rage, the feeling of being imprisoned, of uncertainty, you made your peace with it. Was that a conscious thing that you worked at, or just things fell into place somehow?
So I think that where I come from is a different different page, and I totally understand when Amandeep spoke about mental health versus mental illness. I think what I've suffered from all my life is being the sunshine child. There are a lot of pressures with being perfect, and so when you struggle with being a perfect mother, a perfect wife, what we were talking about earlier, the masks that we put out when we go out into the world, and the avara gardi, for example, that Nirupama ji was just talking about. I think my life and the lives of the people around me were so busy. We were like these rats on a treadmill, and we were on it every single day, and things to do and people to visit, and our lives were so busy that we were constantly pretending that we were fine. Everything was just fine. We were just like, I would not say we were living a superficial life, not at all. I think we had very deep conversations, but we never really told each other how we were feeling. Depression, for example, I never, of course I understand what depression is about. I went through something postpartum, but again, it's not something I discussed in too much detail with even my closest friends. And somehow when the lockdown happened, I feel like I mean, the strange part is that I think the first part of lockdown also there was a competition in terms of, there was so much, how do we ace lockdown happening in the circles that we were in, lockdown goals, so to say. We were all cooking these meals and making the most. There was talent. There was like a whole talent show that was going on. There were songs being sung and paintings, and I mean, I've participated in some of them. So the thing is that I think we feel like we've been taught at all points to ace everything. You need to be doing the best and the most perfect job, and you're constantly, despite acing it, you're constantly feeling this fear of being judged. And you don't know that you're fearing this judgment, but you are mentally, you're feeling this sort of strange fear. So I think when the lockdown happened for me, once all that excitement over showing my talent sort of settled down, there was a very strange kind of stripping that happened. And the sunshine sort of just moved away, and there were these dark clouds that had always been there. Um, and yeah, I think I started writing, and there was a strange kind of purging that was going on. And all of this, strangely enough, when we started to talk, around us, when I started to talk to my friends or people around me, I started to realize that there's so much stuff we've not told each other, and it's to do with mental health, because we've always hidden and pretended that all is well, but actually living in this in the mainstream, there is so much that regular, that you struggle with on a day-to-day basis. Mental illness is one thing, but even mental health is a big, big problem. And that I think is something that I wrote about in the book. And a lot of the stuff that I wrote about for me was went out. And yes, that is true that I feel like there is a lot of venting that I did in that book. Um, I mean, there's a lot more that I want to say, but for the moment, I've stepped out. I've tried to find peace. I've tried to be now more honest with myself, and therefore, I think that this is a very important conversation for us to have, because I think we just hide a lot more. I think the kind of honesty that we are now, the conversation that we are having now, for example, is a very important discussion.
How much of that, Gayatri, do you think, not only in your case personally, but for many of us, how much of this that we have, let's say, realized or learned, is going to stay with us when we get back onto the that treadmill, when we're on the highway, when the thrill and the speed is back in our lives? How much of this is going to well, how do I put it? Empower us to feel vulnerable and to say, yeah, nothing is perfect. It's not going to be, and it's all right.
I think for the people, for us, for the people who are going through this pandemic, and I think for the next generation as well, kids who are going to remember this. I don't know how long this situation will last, but I don't think this will be very easy to forget. This is what I feel. I don't think we will be able to forget what this time has done for our minds and for our hearts and for our souls. The anxiety, the fears that we are talking about, mortality, I was getting these peculiar rashes, which I could not understand. I couldn't understand what they were, where they were coming from. And then of course I did a lot of Google research, and there was nothing wrong. You see, there was nothing wrong. It was just all the news that you were reading and all the WhatsApp messages that you were getting, and there were people that you knew so well, and they'd never done anything wrong. As people always told, good things happen to good people, and just stay on your right path and everything will be all right. Well, it's not that simple. And I think this pandemic has sort of put that out for you and shown you that, hey, it's a Russian roulette. It doesn't matter. There are no blacks and whites. There are no rules. So yeah, the embankment at the end of the day is only you, and you need to know what makes you happy and what works for you. And only if you are happy, you can make anybody else happy. And the lovely term which I love, which the dear Prime Minister has given us, Atmanirbhar. I think that's a very important term in terms of self-reliance, being Atmanirbhar on yourself. And I don't think that's a lesson that will be very easy to forget. I don't.
Well, Aman, I can come to you because I read Sepia Leaves, and then it had been some time after, and there were other things that happened, other books that come, and I had sort of forgotten it. And then when Jerry did the collection of Book of Light and your autobiographical piece in it, My Mother's Breast, it is, I remember when I was editing, proofreading, and I did that, and then after that piece, I had to get up, go out, get a cigarette, smoke, come back, and then work. Why I'm talking about this is that you have experience of that kind of affliction, and it's let's say the something that when we're talking about all of this, most people don't have an experience of that. From that experience and that understanding of the affliction and the extent of it, what was it that you saw during the pandemic? How did you see it differently? I mean, I'm sure you would have seen it a little differently than from, let's say, somebody who hasn't seen the suffering and who hasn't actually cared for somebody, knowing, as you also said towards the end, that the best that you could do is only help them die peacefully without pain.
How did I see it? There are two parts to it. One is initially when quarantine became a big word, I was joking that we writers are normally always in quarantine. We hardly get out. We maximum go to a friend's place and come back. We are not very social people as such, most writers, at least, or at least me. I can't even say about others. But as it was unfolding, my wife got very involved with the migrant workers who were walking back home. You know, I mean, we somehow have even forgotten that Bihar elections are on, and this should have been the biggest issue. Like uh, roughly double the people who migrated during partition migrated during the pandemic. Now, partition numbers are around 14 million and 1 million dead. There is not that kind of death at this point, but there were around 30 million people walking back home. You know, those pictures of those slippers lying on the train tracks will be the most important picture of the pandemic for years to come. But our media is it's so ad hoc. It just moves around things so quickly that we are unable to focus on anything. And that was my primary experience, that I had thought that, okay, now this has happened. I will write the book that has been waiting because I started writing Punjab, and I just couldn't get to it. I managed to write this essay, but I could not get to it because that book was actually about migration and memory. And I'm like, we are all suffering right now. We are all going through this crisis right now. What good is this book 2 years later or 6 months later going to do to people? We need help right now. And that was the greatest challenge at that point, on how to help everybody around us in some ways which is meaningful to them, whether it is they need train ticket or whether they need food or whether they need train tickets also started later. Many of them were just willing to walk away. And what do we do with that? And of course, now I'm very glad you brought up my mother's breast. And when I wrote that, it was actually in a few hours after my mother died. And I came back from the cremation and I just poured myself out onto that diary. It was initially 22 pages, computer pages. And I told Jerry, I said, I won't add or delete anything from it, but you please edit it just the way you think it is right, because 7 years later, it does not make sense to go back and revisit and try to improve the writing. And that's why it has that rawness which hit you also. That's why people who read Sepia Leaves, I love to say I steal one day from their life, because they can read it in 24 hours. Roughly everybody reads it in that much time. But the point that I was earlier also making while talking about, say, the periodic table or mathematics, or what Nirupama ji was saying, that here was a clinical diagnosis of a particular condition, another doctor completely said, no, not required, and what Gayatri said in her small 1-minute clip earlier, is this grayness, and accepting the grayness of life and of death as well. And just being part of it and not really trying to define things too closely. Because none of the labels in psychiatry really hold water. You go with the same exact conditions to one psychiatrist to another, and friends of mine, people I work with, communities I live with, this keeps happening. One doctor will diagnose you as bipolar, another will schizophrenic, third with manic depressive disorder. Even the medicine, the spectrum of it. The thing is, in psychiatry, or somebody's just mentioned here that it's also a psychosomatic issue, it is true. All of this is part of this whole gamut of things called mental health / mental illness.
That's right.
And we need to accept ourselves wherever we stand in this. And all of us stand somewhere or the other. I personally have learned that there are no lines really. There are no hard and fast lines. It's not like, the Bible versus the Darwin's table in biology, Darwin's theory in biology. I mean, it's not like the minerals on the periodic table that each is fixed, each has this function. Within psychology, psychiatry, and the way we define all these other spheres, whether it's behavioral science or whatever we call them, all of them are trying to grapple with something where we have not had the fundamental breakthrough required to set it in position. This is very important for us to realize. And all of us are somewhere on the spectrum. None of us is fully fine.
But also the tragic thing is, in which this lockdown has made apparent, is that all of us are there somewhere in the spectrum, and that would include everybody. That would also include the migrants who were walking.
Right.
They may be hungry, but they're also susceptible to these, illnesses of the mind.
Right.
But all of us will be out there, but all of us will not have access to not just medical care, but even basic support systems.
Yeah.
And I think the in many ways, I just sometimes wonder, and I'm sorry, I'm talking about myself here rather than asking a question, is for most of us, I saw many people who the suffering around you, uh, even if you were not personally, you didn't have any anxiety, fear, etc. How can that not affect you? And I think,
Absolutely.
I think that I hope that we learn that lesson, that we are all connected. That suffering, even if you don't want it to affect you, if you think you will not let it affect you, it will affect you. Even the worst of us will be affected by it, I think. And if that does some correction to the madness that we live with of cruelty and apathy, I think that would be, let's call that a gift of the pandemic.
No, so to me, it was very clear that these are two things that help us in good times. These are the two things that will help us in these times as well. And those are kindness and compassion.
Mm.
And even before that starts, you have to first acknowledge that there is a problem. The whole thing is denial. Even the government is denying what has happened. Even the government was denying, even at its peak, it was denying what was happening. Unless we start acknowledging and then we approach every issue with kindness and compassion, we are not going to make much headway. And if you look around now, like Manoj Bajpayee, for example, did a brilliant rap song. And that one rap song could sort of carry in it everything that the Bihari migrants were going through. This is what art can do. This is the brilliance of what art can do.
But I hope there's more of that will happen. But Preeti, do you think we should take questions now? What should huh?
Yeah, definitely. Yes. I've
Like to just add one more thing, and I think that's something on the spectrum that we are talking about. There's one very important thing that we sort of miss, and that I think are the children. I think the children are really, really deeply affected, mentally affected by this lockdown. It's been extremely difficult for them, and maybe Maja House should do something with what's happening with the children at this point. It's um, because so my 3-year-old daughter was watching me watch Bad Billionaires on television, and she asked me, do these people have children? Can I meet them sometime, these guys who are on the television talking? Do they have some kids that I can hang out with? Because for them now, the children have just become little boxes that come on computer screens, and that is the reality. And there are children who've been born during this pandemic and who've become 1.5 years old. They never stepped out. One of my friends kids stepped out for the first time just earlier this week at the age of 1. And I mean, so that this is another whole spectrum of people, which is the kids, and they are suffering pretty deeply, I would say.
Are there any questions from anybody? There have been some comments, all right. I think a couple of them you've already read out, Ravi. And Navneet Bhullar is asking, compassion is where India is sick. Has that changed in pandemic times? Does anybody want to take that? Yeah.
I'll take it because see, it depends on what do you consider the nature, or the world. In fact, is it geography? Is it political representation, or is it people? I think in India during the pandemic, middle class really stepped out way and beyond its reach and ability to actually help people who were going back home. Some were trying to stop them, but most were saying, we recognize that we have failed you. We have not created spaces for you to feel safe. And now this is your right to go back home and we'll try to help you. And lakhs and lakhs of people help. I mean, I know of one NGO which started with an ambition of 5 lakh rupees if they could raise. They've ended up raising 5 crore rupees. And they helped, like, I think more than 50,000 families with rations for 2 months, and plus many other things that they're doing with it. So I think it showed. Unfortunately, the media is caught with other things like Sushant Singh Rajput and others. But even then, what I really miss is compassion is there in society. What I miss is a discourse about compassion. For example, look at the Sushant Singh Rajput story. What is it really about? What were all those TV channels really braying about? They were braying about something which is very critical for everybody who has been a caregiver. It is about surreptitious medicines. Was Ria, she was not drugging him. She was trying to contain what was already there in him. It was manifest. He had an issue. He was going to counselors. He was talking to doctors. Whether she was educated to do it or not, whether she should have done it or not, are all ethical questions more than questions of law. So it is the media that keeps giving spin to it. But I think civil society showed that it has risen and it can stand up. Till about July, August, until what Nirupama ji was saying, the sacking started. I mean, 1.8 million people have lost their jobs. Now, when you don't have to eat, you can't even share what you don't have. So that is another crisis, and that's the economic crisis we have got into. But I think there was a demonstration of compassion.
I just wanted to, I agree with Aman that there were lakhs and lakhs of people in a country of where the middle class is crores and crores. So I think we need to keep that in mind. And also, if these people who go out and give some food, wonderful, and a little bit of aid, most of these people, at least in my experience, have not questioned, condemned, criticized the very inhuman lockdown that created the suffering.
Absolutely.
So I think we cannot let, and we are all part of the middle class, but I will, here say, I did not support it, you did not support it. There aren't too many people who didn't. If at that fundamental level, if you are not going to resist what is so wrong, then it does not matter whether you go out with 10 rotis or 20 rotis.
So that's I completely agree with that. No doubt about it. I mean, we are failing every day, and we are failing in very, very big ways. I mean, Varavara Rao, for example, Sudha Bhardwaj, these people are ill. They are in jail for no real crime. And we have not even been able to raise a voice to free them from it. Omar Khalid has been put into it. He'll be there for a few years now. What is his crime really?
No, I know. I'm just saying it, even people who say that they really want to get into politics of it, all right. But the migrants were there not by choice. And
yeah.
That which needs to be questioned. And I think in terms of mental health that we were talking about, a society is not healthy. A society that allows this to happen is not healthy. Well, that is the point I wanted to make.
Ravi, my personal take on our overall society is, as political consciousness goes, I think we have not even emerged from the trauma of partition,
Right.
75 years back, the divide that was set in us and caused us to break our bland, into nations, new nations which were formed. We haven't even emerged from that trauma yet. We have a lot of healing to do as a society.
Right.
There was a comment right in the beginning from Poonam Sahi who said that many of her mother's friends have felt that emotionally this has been as terrible or even worse in some ways than the trauma of partition. I mean, the silencing or the actually isolation of people has been so bad. And especially, I think, for older people, the older you are, the worse it must have been, because you had nobody coming in even to help you to bring your daily things to you or help you with housework or anything else. The isolation and the sheer magnitude of what confronted you, especially for older people.
Yeah.
And I mean, just like for demonetization, there was no inquiry. For GST, they have been flopped right in front of our eyes, no inquiry. Similarly for this one, I mean, what could not have, you just needed to give 1 week, 10 days notice. I mean, can't you just give that notice? It's just amazingly actually mad the way this country behaves.
In
There's a
fact,
question. There's a
you
question
know,
from Pratyaksha Malu. Arvindaji, if you will unmute her and ask her to speak. Pratyaksha.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, thank you for the chance to speak and ask you the question. I want to ask that, in this entire lockdown, I have realized that each and every person have each and every emotion. Like we were talking about compassion. So we all have the compassion. And it's anger, it's all good emotions that we all say, good emotions and bad emotions. But society and our old we can say the old thought patterns that are used to raise a kid, that you should never be angry about, you should never show your anger to your elders even if they are wrong. So that somehow shut a kid's emotion. Even if it's right or even if it's wrong, you should never show your emotions. So that's how it like what I realized, that people are unable to express their emotions and as well as their thoughts, and they're scared of showing up because they were raised this way. Especially in the middle class, what I see, that kids, the youngsters especially nowadays, are very very scared of showing their emotions because they get judged. They are scared of being judged. They get judged by other people, their friends, even their family sometimes, that you're not right, you're not doing right, you are having this anger for something, like you are not appreciating whatever is there in the society, whatever is given to you. Sometimes it's not like that, but uh, people are judged very wrong. So how what can help that? What can help people to open up with their emotions? How can this get better so kids, so the people
Okay, let
nowadays
them answer
can
now.
get better?
Let's get
Yeah.
some reply to that. Yeah. Okay.
Well, Jerry, yesterday, Jerry's in Children's session, Jerry spoke about this, that, it is children, they should be allowed to express themselves and not anger, resentment, whatever it is. But in a society where हमारे पंजाब और बाकी जगह बहुत ही होता है पाँव छूना वगैरह that the distancing between anybody who's older and younger, the young are not supposed to criticize Krishna. I think the only way to do it, Pratyaksha, I don't know how young you are, but just get angry the next time. That will happen. They'll learn to deal with it.
I think Shreedeep wants to make a comment. You need to unmute him then. Yeah, you want to say something? No. Okay. Then anybody else with I think Aman.
No, I think I completely agree
Not
with
you.
Jerry.
The other Aman had something to say also. I think she was adding on to a point you made. Did you see that?
Aman Kaur. Yeah, I read
Yeah.
it. Yeah. No, it's absolutely. We have so easily accepted the new normal. It almost seems like, I mean, the world has changed. And what is most lost is the sense of touch. Even as we are getting back to normal, or as Nirupama ji said, that we are learning to not be afraid of what is going on, but touch will take a long time coming back. And I really feel in my essay also, I talked to some young people and said, what will you do with the dating scene? How will you go out and meet people? And what happens to the whole thing? For the older ones, for somebody who's reaching middle age like me, it is still okay, But what will the younger people do? And as Gayatri said, what will the children do?
No, why is it okay for middle-aged people? Yeah.
No, I think also, with this, there's another, there's a whole new chapter of lockdown, which is the virtual world and what's going on in the virtual world at this point. I mean, it is crazy, the amount of porn, the kind of good and bad content that is being put out, including, I mean, yesterday there was this conversation about child abuse. The lanes of the internet are completely infested with people because everybody is at home and they're crowding the internet. It's like the little gullies of Chandni Chowk are now on the internet. So what you were just saying about the dating scene, I mean, I think that's another conversation. I think altogether, to understand what and where people are deriving their where they're finding solace of their desires. A lot of it is happening on the internet because of the pandemic and the
It's
lockdown.
all virtual in nature,
It is
no?
all
Like,
virtual, yes.
so that's itself
Done it
is a
all.
it's itself a diminishing of a whole dynamic of the body, like, so even yesterday we were talking about accepting yourself, accepting the body. How do you accept yourself solo? Like, what do you do? Like, so.
And I think that, that conversation that we were having about the older people, I think that is so, so important, because in this whole journey, what we've done is that the older people who are anyway isolated, I mean, the grandchildren were anyway visiting them maybe once or twice a year. And now they've got this legit kind of like ruling that has come, and they've been told, okay, just let them be locked in all by themselves. Don't let them have servants. So really, the old people, the old people, from whatever I understand of it, are having a really, really difficult time, because I mean, it's really tough to just have these virtual conversations. A lot of them can't even be on the internet. They don't know how to work Zoom. They're learning, but it's tough for them.
Like my mother wrote this poem that was almost at the beginning of the lockdown, because she has not managed to go back home. She has been staying with us in Delhi for the last eight months now. She hasn't been able to go back to Bhopal, and she wrote a poem which was called Ghar Vapsi,
Yeah.
with all its many
Oh.
connotations. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's hitting people in many, many different ways.
And
But I like what Sarabjot also said, Professor Bahel had said earlier about looking at it. I mean, there are certain positive things, because we've all actually learned quite a lot in this period also, for Maja House as well, outreach, it's made a difference.
I actually learned to cook, like, right. And
Participate
then,
in the lockdown talent show.
yeah, I've become very, very good at mutton biryani now, like, it's really, really good. And I got adopted by a cat, the cat who made a nuisance initially. And he has adopted me completely. Have made me a slave, like.
So thanks, everybody. I think, Ravi, if you'd like to wrap up the session a little bit, and then we'll get Jasmeet to do the formal.
I think Sudeep wanted to say something. Sudeep had
Did
put
he?
up his hand.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I've been listening very intently and so on. But the thing is, we go on and on about the negativity, that, there is a lot of light too. And if you don't embrace the light, you'll never get out of the negativity. So, rather than just only think, I just made a point earlier that people who are actually afflicted with mental health have been able to cope much better in general, because their coping mechanisms is much, much stronger. They have had to make it stronger. So the pandemic coming through is, not really been that effective. What's really happened is it's put a spotlight on the gray zone of society. People who were not able to talk more are now talking much more. But some of it, I must say, there has to be sort of intelligence caution regarding this, because some of it is, for lack of any other word, is also frivolous. Because a lot of people are so entitled. I'm talking about the privileged class. A lot of people are so entitled that not getting things which are not that important makes them anxious or depressed or sad and suicidal is a problematic thing. So you realize how brittle, especially the millennials, are, in a sense. You're talking about touch. I mean, the whole idea of touch has gone a long time ago. People are so bought into the Western concept of physical distance, and hugging is not allowed. I mean, I love children. I pick up a child anytime I would go to someone's house. I would pick up a child and put him or her on my lap. People now tell me don't do that, because a parent might say you're you can't touch. So it's really sad. I mean, let's just recognize that we in India are one of the sickest countries in the world. Sick out here. We have this veneer of culture and veneer of history and so on and so forth, but actually inside we are sick. And unless we can sort of sort that out, I don't think any master plan or change of government or anything will make any difference. But there is light. You wake up every day in the morning and the sun shines. That doesn't refuse to set. The stars come out every night. The birds sing. They are not depressed. For God's sakes, we are very small in a larger holistic thing. So if we can just take some lessons from what's around us, it might be useful. I know it's not easy, but we have to look for light.
So, are there any more questions or should we wrap up?
No, I think that's
okay. I just, thanks, Sudeep. I think, yes, of course, there's a lot of light, and at least, when I went home, I saw many people, elderly, whatever, hugging, which, it carries on. And I don't think it's a question of privilege. I think people who are privileged and who are disprivileged, everybody, I don't think we need to get into these grades of suffering, etc. And as for birds, after about 2 weeks of the lockdown, everybody talked about the birds. If you can actually hear, I did not want to hear so many birds after 5 weeks. So you find your own things and care. I think, yes, you're right. There's frivolity, but there's also precious, too much precious stuff also going around. It's just, I think it's important to see that there is a problem. But we will have to deal with it. And yes, we are in many ways sick, but I suppose every society, large parts of every society is sick. But we have to deal with it. I think we are just as good or bad as anybody else. But right now, I think it's the bad in us that seems to be more visible. That's the only unfortunate thing. But we will get through this. But what I will say, and I will be probably called irresponsible, is that, all right, observe all the protocol, take all the precautions, but bloody go out there. I mean, wear your mask, stay a little, don't go too close to people, get on with life. That's the only way people who are suffering will also have an opportunity to, revive their life. And this thing of sitting at home and being very, careful and saying you're irresponsible if you go out, I think is also part of the problem. So sorry about that rant, but thank you very much, everyone. Nirupama, you were trying to say something. Would you like to sum up? Because, I think you... and then
No, I just wanted to, one area we didn't touch on because of so much involved was the increasing in cases of domestic violence. That various groups and psychologists and psychiatrists were bringing attention to that. And the other thing which was about the migrants, one of the most ironic things in this great Modi wave that we are living through was that in one interview I read, the migrants were saying, "Shayad Modi sahab ko hamare bare mein pata nahi tha." He did not know about us, that we have no homes, we'll have to, move on. So even there, he was being given the benefit of ignorance or innocence. That was just what I wanted to add.
Jasmeet, we'll ask you to please do the wrap up.
I need to be unmuted. Am I
Yes,
audible?
you are. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So coming to concluding a beautiful session, first of all, my apologies to Ravi and Aman. I didn't acknowledge you in the beginning. I missed out. Hello. And secondly, it is a very wide spectrum topic that we were discussing today and yesterday, and it's multi-layered as well. We all know that. Silence is at the baseline. Masks people have been wearing about their personality problems, and masks we are wearing physically as well now since it's the COVID season. And true, we deny ourselves and we shy away to talk. Anxiety tops the charts, depression couples it. It's a sad state. Yes, too many are suffering from irresponsible medical interventions like Nirupama pointed out. Tell me how many Dr. Casters are there who would check you at the right moment. Had she been put through the shock treatment and termed a schizo, I would never know my Niru again. And then we are talking that talking solves the problems. Yes, 80% can be solved just by talking. Like Aman pointed out, a fundamental breakthrough, yes, only comes with talking, and everybody has to talk. Whether you talk through your pen or you talk through your mic or you stick up a public platform, irrespective of those things, talk. And my question is, why are we talking in English? वर्नाकुलर में हम बात क्यों नहीं करते? पंजाबी मराठी में क्यों नहीं हो सकती? आपसे कौन अपना इशू डिस्कस करेगा? उसको तो अंग्रेजी बोलनी ही नहीं. Yesterday it was pointed out that people have sexual dysfunctions, mismatches in relations, and power play and sexual molestations and child molestations. वो किससे बात करेंगे? Shrek psychiatrists, no, they're beyond their reach. पंजाबी हिंदी में वर्नाकुलर में किससे बात करेंगे? कौन समझता है? मैं अपनी ऐसी बात अपनी बहुत अच्छी सहेली को, दोस्त को बोल सकती हूँ. ये दिल की बात होगी, वो अपने ही दिल में रखेगी, ये आगे तो जाएगी नहीं, तो प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व कहाँ से होनी है हमारी? Talking is at the baseline and will be the corrector to my feeling. You could think otherwise. And we are all, you people all here, everybody in this Zoom meeting is a very mentally alive person. We are writers, thinkers, and various modes of life. But what about the masses? Unko kaun puchta hai? Schools, colleges, shows, documentaries, seminars. Mandatory क्यों नहीं हो सकते ऐसे institutions में? At least a child would know that I have been malhandled. ये गलत है. उनको पता ही नहीं. We know of so many cases of incest. हम कुछ नहीं कर सकते क्योंकि वो बात सामने ही नहीं आती. अगर एक औरत बोलना भी चाहती है तो उसकी माँ उसको रोकती है, उसकी mother-in-law रोकती है. Women are the worst in their feline jealousies or whatever. So talking to my mind has to be done, whether you start a column or you write or you talk. It happened with me once. I was traveling in a train. मेरे साथ एक चुपचाप सा लड़का बैठा था. उसके होंठों का रंग मुझे अच्छा नहीं लगा. You know, it simply tells you either he's a chain smoker or he's onto something else. The lips were dark, cyanosed, a little cyanosed. थोड़ी देर के बाद हम बात करने लगे. उन दिनों तो कोई चाय वाय की सर्विस भी नहीं होती थी गाड़ियों में. He was a shy introvert kind of a boy. और somehow उसको लगा कि मैं एक stranger हूँ. वो फट से मेरे को बोल दिया. मैंने थोड़ा सा पूछा, कहता जी मैं ड्रग्स खाता हूँ. ये मानना ही बहुत मुश्किल है. Probably because I was a stranger, he was easy to come across. तो बातें करते करते I found out that we both lived in Chandigarh and I just told him, I said, तू निकल बाहर, तेरे को क्या प्रॉब्लम है? जॉब की प्रॉब्लम? कहता जी मेरे पास पैसा बहुत है. बस कुछ करने को था नहीं, घर में कोई पूछता नहीं था, तो मैं ऐਵੇਂ ही लग गया खाने. And being in Chandigarh, I introduced him to AA, Alcoholic Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. वो लड़का उसमें ट्रीटमेंट भी, मेडिकल भी लिया, सोशल इशू भी आ गया, मेडिकल इशू भी आ गया. And the nurse who was treating him was also already on Pethidine. She was a Pethidine addict too. And the two got along fairly well and they landed up marrying. And last I met him was a couple of years back. He says, "जी job तो छोड़ दी, चाहिए ही नहीं, हमारे पास पैसा बहुत है." मैं कहा क्या करते हो? कहते we are both counselors now, we've taken training. तो हम तो, आपने तो हमें light दिखा दी and you are the corrector, so I was probably the Dr. Castor. They've been doing counseling for drug addicts and alcoholics for the last 13, 14 years that I know of. सो बात करने से हम करते नहीं बात, अंग्रेजी झाड़ के निकल जाओ, वो बेचारा सोचेगा क्या इससे बात करें, मैडम अंग्रेजी बोलती है, साहब अंग्रेजी बोलते हैं। अपनी जुबान पे आइए, कोई आपको समझे कि आप उनकी बात समझ सकते हो, बात आगे बढ़ती है। Am I right, जी? So on that note, I would like to thank Ravi, Neeru, Amandeep, Gayatri, Arvinder Chamak, Preeti, I call her the magic woman, and the entire Mother House team for these 2 days of enlightening, very, very deep thinking, enlightening sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good
Thank you,
night and
Preeti.
goodbye. It was indeed a wonderful session. And God bless